The Last Voyage of the Starship Enterprise. This is episode 72.
You're listening to 70s Trek with Bob Turner and Kelly Casco, the fan podcast that looks at Star Trek in the 1970s. It was the decade that built a franchise.
Kelly, the year was 1976, and America celebrated her bicentennial. You know, the film Rocky, it was released that year, and a little company known as Apple Computer was formed in a California garage. Can you imagine? I'm Bob Turner.
And I'm Kelly Casto. 76 was also the year that Star Trek became a cultural phenomenon. Two big things happened that year. First, President Gerald Ford renamed the first NASA space shuttle Enterprise.
Yay!
Yay, yeah. And the second was a comedy skit performed on the last show of the first season of Saturday Night Live.
And that skit was called The Last Voyage of the Starship Enterprise. And we will talk about it. But first, let's tell listeners how they can find us.
All you have to do is visit our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/70strek. And you can also send us an email to 70strek@gmail.com.
You can also find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. Just search for 70s Trek.
And please consider subscribing and leaving a comment or a review because that helps other Trek fans find our show.
Live from New York, it's Saturday night!
Kelly, you remember that theme?
Yes.
Man, I'll tell you. In 1976, I just want to reminisce for a second. I was in 7th grade. And, you know, I started having, like, different interests than my parents. Started liking different music and different shows. And I wanted to get into things that my friends thought were cool. And in 1976, man, Saturday Night Live was cool.
It sure was. There was nothing like it on TV at that time. I don't think even before that time. But for our show, it was one skit in particular we're going to focus on, and that's The Last Voyage of the Starship Enterprise. It was the perfect tribute to Star Trek.
Yeah, and, you know, looking back now, it's really kind of a moment in the 70s when everybody gets it. They begin to realize just how popular Star Trek really is because SNL pointed it out to us. And, you know, after all, they didn't do The Last Voyage of the Wild Wild West or The Last Voyage of Lost in Space.
You're right.
Yeah, let me just point out the obvious there.
Right.
Yeah, but, you know, before we talk about the skit, maybe we ought to talk a little bit about Saturday Night Live first.
Please do.
Great. You know, the story of SNL really starts with, and who else could it be? Johnny Carson. What's the connection? I'll tell you what it is. The Tonight Show used to run reruns on late Saturday nights. Between 1965 and 1975, they aired as The Best of Carson. But in 1974, you know, Johnny had been doing the show for a while, wanted to be able to take more time off. And so his thought was, I don't want the reruns airing on Saturday because I want to be able to use that content when I want to take off.
Right.
So he tells NBC, we're not going to do this rerun Best of Carson thing anymore. So now NBC has to look for a replacement show for the fall of 1975 at 11:30 on Saturdays. So the VP of late night programming at that time was Dick Ebersol. He gets the suggestion to go talk to Lorne Michaels, who had been a comedy writer on Laugh-In. And at that time, he had also starred in a Canadian comedy series with another guy. So he was well-versed in comedy, was a well-known writer. They come up with a skit comedy show and they decided to aim it at 18 to 25-year-olds. Now, this was a target demographic that NBC hadn't tried to hit before. Basically baby boomers at that time, young baby boomers.
Yeah.
So the show was originally going to be called NBC's Saturday Night. Actually, that was the name, because even though they wanted it to be called Saturday Night Live, there was a show on ABC already called Saturday Night Live with Howard Cosell. Remember Howard Cosell?
Yes.
Don't you wish we could find a Star Trek tie to do an episode about Howard Cosell?
I hope there isn't one.
Howard Cosell was everywhere in the 70s.
He was.
How can we find? We have to find that tie somewhere. Anyway, because Cosell's show, I digress. Cosell's show went off the air in late 75, and then the name becomes available. So NBC buys it, and finally in 1977, they can now premiere the show as Saturday Night Live. So, of course, most people have seen Saturday Night Live, but that original show was supposed to be sketches of high concept. And what high concept is basically what-if comedy. So it would take and the best example I can think of is the caveman lawyer. What if a caveman was a lawyer? And you pull the comedy from all of those situations. High concept comedy. And it had a talented cast known as the Not Ready for Prime Time Players. And just about every one of these names went on to do films afterwards. Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, Chevy Chase, Jane Curtin, Garrett Morris, Lorraine Newman, and Gilda Radner. All big names now. And I don't know about you, but I remember them very fondly. That was a great cast.
Oh, yeah, and everything they put out after Saturday Night Live, you just had to see.
Absolutely.
And it was gold, too.
It was. And if you didn't grow up in the 70s and you're listening to our show, just know that at a time when we only had the 3 networks on Saturday night, if you weren't yet going out with your friends and you were 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade, Saturday Night Live was must-see viewing.
Oh, yeah. And Monday morning that's all you talked about.
It was. Yeah, you're right. Man, did you see the killer bees?
Yeah.
Belushi's nuts. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about the skit. The last Voyage skit aired on May 29th, 1976, and that was the last episode in the first season. And it was written by Michael O'Donoghue, along with John Belushi, and he had Belushi in mind to play Captain Kirk. The two had noticed how Star Trek was becoming more and more popular in syndication in the 1970s. And Belushi was a fan, and O'Donoghue was a fan, and so they decided, let's do a skit about the show. And then as they talked more and more, it was, let's do a skit about the show about how NBC prematurely pulled the plug.
Yeah.
So, because don't forget, this is a very counter-culture program. Their skits poked fun at politicians, at institutions, at everywhere that they saw hypocrisy. Saturday Night Live went and made fun of it.
No one was safe.
No one was safe. And, of course, you remember the weekend updates, the news.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Right, the news show. Everybody got grilled on that. If you were in the news the prior week, guess what? You're going to be on SNL. So the two worked on the skit for about 30 days in April and May in 1976. And while O'Donoghue and Belushi both wanted to make the skit successful, things weren't coming together well. The rehearsals weren't going well. First of all, it seemed too long, and O'Donoghue was concerned that the audience would get bored and wouldn't think it was funny. Belushi was also having some problems. He couldn't get William Shatner's cadence and performance as Kirk down. He wasn't quite nailing it. And O'Donoghue told him flat out after one of the last rehearsals, man, you really need to pick it up, or this is going to fall flat on its face. And an indication how bad Belushi was doing was that NBC execs were actually considering canceling the sketch and not having it air. Well, if that
Thank God they didn't.
Yeah, right. And if that isn't bad enough, then there was Chevy Chase.
Yes.
Now, in the sketch, he played Spock. But more importantly, Chevy didn't like the idea of being second banana to anybody, and he didn't want to be second banana to Belushi in this skit. And in rehearsals, he was ad-libbing, and he was trying to draw more attention to himself. And in fact, the skit that aired, you can see him sometimes in the background as Elliot Gould's NBC exec is talking, and there's Chevy Chase continually trying to do the Vulcan nerve pinch, and he tries again, and that's him hamming it up.
Yep.
Trying to get attention in the background. So with all of this going on, there wasn't a lot of confidence in this skit as the air date approached. But people will tell you who perform live that sometimes the cameras go on, that little red light on the camera, lights up, and magic happens. And I think that's what happened with this skit. These guys came together and magic happened. And Kelly,
there's no doubt about that.
There's no doubt about that. So Kelly, why don't you tell us a little bit about this skit? You're looking at that more in detail.
Okay. So I'm just going to give you a high-level synopsis of this skit. It's much better to watch. So go out. If you haven't seen it, go out and watch it. Stop right now, or pause us right now. Go watch it, then come back.
Yeah, there's a thing called YouTube. Maybe
yes.
You've heard of it. You can go search for it.
Exactly. All right. So set the stage here. You're on the bridge of the Enterprise. Kirk's in the chair, Kirk, which is Belushi, and they're being chased by something, an unknown, vessel. And they're being actually pursued by a 20th century automobile. Spock identifies it as a 1968 Chrysler Imperial with tinted windshields and retractable headlights. Now, how does Spock have any reference to, Earth vehicles, but whatever. And then Kirk asks him, "Hey, look up those little blue and orange numbers, the license plate." So Spock looks it up, and it goes, "It was registered to a corporation known as NBC, a company that manufactures cookies."
They're talking about Nabisco, right?
Right. They're talking about Nabisco. And the thing that they're, the funny bit here is that Nabisco stands for National Biscuit Company.
Right.
And so just kind of confusing National Broadcasting Company with National Biscuit Company.
That's hilarious.
So Kirk orders to fire phasers and photon torpedoes at the ship. Well, there's no effect. And then Sulu's played by Akira Yoshimoru.
Nice. Way to get that done.
Yeah. And he says, "The helm's not responding." Well, Kirk gets on the intercom with Scotty and says, "What in the blazes is going on?" And Scotty, who is just the voice, and Dan Aykroyd plays the voice, it's like, "We're losing power. We don't have anything. Go to auxiliary," Kirk says. And, we're losing power on everything. So big, if this was really Star Trek, just imagine, Shatner hamming it up on the bridge. Then McCoy comes on the bridge, and McCoy is played by Dan Aykroyd as well, and says, "There's aliens on this ship, and they didn't beam aboard, but they just merely walked out of a curtain."
They walked out from behind the curtains. As if on one of the decks there were just curtains, and these guys just stepped out from behind them.
The aliens, of course, are NBC executives, and Elliot Gould plays Herb Goodman, and his associate Curtis is played by Garrett Morris. And they just walk onto the bridge, and they inform the crew that's all sitting there still in character. Well, Star Trek's been canceled. Well, Kirk's not going to stand for this. So he stands up, and everybody is looking at him, and he says, "Fire phasers!" at the aliens. Well, nothing happens, of course.
And did you notice the phasers they're using are the Rumco toy phasers?
Spock goes over. He tries this little nerve pinch. Nothing happens. And then Goodman grabs Spock's ears and throws him on the floor. Now, at this point, everybody on the crew of the Enterprise accepts the fate. Okay, we're giving this up. We know that this is the end of our show, and talk about going to the bar or going home, but not Kirk and Spock. Oh no,
they stay in character.
They stay in character, and Spock, though, he's lost his ears. He's like way out of character. He's for a Vulcan, and is just losing it.
I want my ears back. I want my ears.
Exactly. Kirk, of course, is firmly in character. Belushi, Shatner, whatever at this point. And he's sitting in his chair. And, then Goodman pops back in and tells Kirk / Shatner, "Hey, there's a call from the Margarine Company." Or from a margarine company. And, obviously it's getting wrapped up. They're tearing down the set around them. Literally, the walls are all moving away.
It's chaos.
It's chaos, right, with Spock flailing around the background. And Kirk enters his final log. He says, "And except for one television network, we have found intelligence everywhere in the galaxy." He raises his hand in the Vulcan salute. He says, "Live long and prosper." And then he brings his fingers together, still raising his hand, and adds, "Promise."
And of course, the Margarine Company is Promise.
Right.
And that's in the commercials that he did in the early 70s. That was the last thing he would do, is hold up his hand and go, "Promise."
Promise. Right. Shatner did many of those commercials.
He did.
So there is the premise of the skit. Now, if you want, you can get the skit. It was actually published in June of 78 in Starlog magazine, issue 14.
Nice.
And it has excellent art by Jack Ricard, who was a Mad Magazine artist. And you see the art, you'll recognize it.
So you have to wonder, after this thing airs, what Star Trek alum thought of this skit.
William Shatner said, "I like Belushi's work as Kirk better than my own."
And D-Force Kelly loved it. He'd never seen it, and he actually ran into Belushi somewhere and said, I never got a chance to watch it. And Belushi takes him back to his office and plays it for him off of a videotape, and Kelly just thought it was great.
Yeah, but the best part, later when they're working on the Star Trek film, Kelly had trouble keeping a straight face when acting with Shatner. He kept thinking of Belushi as Kirk.
I can see that happening.
Yeah, I can too.
And, of course, even Gene Roddenberry liked the skit, and he did so much that he actually sent a letter to Elliot Gould praising the parody of the script and the high level of writing and so forth. But that was Gene.
Well, and don't you think he thought, well, hey, this is just adding fuel to the fire.
Right.
Star Trek is coming back.
Right.
And it's not just the Star Trek actors who liked it, though. Entertainers, actors, critics, authors. They all look back at John Belushi's performance and Saturday Night Live, and they all mention this skit as one of the best ever produced on SNL.
Yeah, absolutely. If you go out to Wikipedia, for example, and look up this skit, you're going to see a ton of reviewers who just hail this thing as the greatest skit ever done on SNL or John Belushi's best work ever. So it's held in pretty high regard. Kelly, do you have any final thoughts on the last Voyage?
Well, and I'll be honest here, Bob. In '76, I hadn't found Saturday Night Live yet, so I really didn't get to see this till much later. When VHS came out and all of that. So, it was the best thing. I can't believe I didn't see it in '76. Wish I did.
SNL. What made it so unique is that not only are they doing parodies and comedies, but their skits are primitive, and they have to be to get this stuff on the air live so quickly. But just to give you a quick example, I mean, at the beginning of this sketch, the Enterprise comes in over a painted space background, and it's hanging on a string, swinging back and forth. So, yeah, the comedy is not only the parody, but the comedy is also the primitiveness of their production values. And in a sense, SNL is making fun of themselves. But yes, as you said, there was nothing like SNL in the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
But to have Saturday Night Live do a skit on national TV, it was vindication. It was a bit of a nod to geeks out there that, you know what, this thing's pretty cool. We like it too, and it's going to come back. That's what I took from that. The moment I saw this skit as a kid, it was like, wow, I'm not the only one. There are more people out here that love this show. This is awesome.
Yeah, and how many years after the show went off the air?
Yeah, right. It was 7 years.
Right.
So to have Saturday Night Live give a nod to Star Trek, in my opinion, is as big as President Ford renaming the NASA space shuttle Enterprise.
Yeah, agreed.
And of course, if you are Gene Roddenberry or an exec at Paramount and you've been working, as we've said in earlier episodes, on movie ideas or movie treatments, here's another reason why you got to keep trying. The top's about to blow off, but we can't seem to find an idea that works.
Inconceivable.
And I think we'll stop right there. Next week, we're talking books.
Specifically, the Star Trek Bantam books. See you then.
Thanks for listening to 70s Trek, an independent fan production. Join us next week as we explore more about the production, the actors, the producers, and the influencers of Star Trek in the lost decade of the 1970s on 70s Trek.